Like a silver streak across the midnight sky, our stories move with a brilliance and speed you will never forget. Experience high-octane drama and the thrill of a narrative that never slows down for anything. Click subscribe now and catch the streak before it disappears into the dark.
My brother's rehearsal dinner was supposed to be the happiest night of his life. Instead, my father leaned into the microphone, smiled at the 200 people sitting in that ballroom, and said, "We always joked that our daughter was the one we had to drag across the finish line. Honestly, we're still waiting." The room laughed. I was sitting 3 tables back, not with my parents, not with my brother and his fiancée, but tucked near the back with some of my friends who I'd never met. My mother had assigned the seating. I hadn't said anything about it. I'd flown in from Portland specifically for this weekend, taken 4 days off work, and paid for my own hotel, because my parents said they'd only booked rooms for immediate family, which apparently did not include me. I sat there with my glass of sparkling water and watched my father grin while people applauded, and I thought, this is it. This is the thing I've been explaining to therapists for 8 years, and they keep asking me to give examples. Here's your example. My brother didn't look at me. His fiancée did, briefly, and then looked away. I set down my glass, folded my napkin onto the table, picked up my purse, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't make a scene, I didn't cry, I just left. And nobody came after me. Let me back up. I'm the younger of 2 kids. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up, the difference between how my parents treated us wasn't something you could point to in a single moment. It was more like weather. Just always there, always affecting the temperature of the room, and I was the only one who seemed to notice I was cold. My brother got a car at 16. I was told I needed to save up for one myself because responsibility builds character. My brother's college application essays were proofread by my father, who sat with him at the kitchen table for weeks. When I was applying, my mother told me she trusted me to handle it. I was 17. I sent my essays off with 2 typos in the opening paragraph of my first choice school because I didn't have anyone to check them. My brother failed organic chemistry twice, my parents for a private tutor without blinking. I struggled through AP calculus, and when I asked for help, my father said, "You just need to work harder. Nobody's going to hand you anything in life." None of this was dramatic. That's the thing about growing up as the invisible child, it rarely is. There's no single villain scene. It's just 1,000 small moments where you realize you're a background character in your own family, where the camera is always on someone else, and you've been standing just outside the frame for so long you've stopped expecting anyone to notice. I told myself it didn't bother me. I was good at telling myself that. I moved to Portland at 23 for a job at a healthcare nonprofit. I was good at my job. I made friends. I built a life that was genuinely mine, which felt like the first thing that had ever belonged fully to me. I called my parents on birthdays. I came home for Thanksgiving most years. I kept things civil and light, and I never brought up the past because there was no point. And also because, when I had tried, once, when I was 25, my mother had looked at me with this expression of genuine confusion and said, "I honestly don't know what you're talking about. You were loved just as much as your brother. You're being dramatic." So I stopped bringing it up. I got very good at smiling and nodding and counting down the hours until I could get back on a plane. Then my brother got engaged. His fiancée, I'll be honest, I didn't know her well. They'd been together for 2 years before he called to tell me he'd proposed. I found out at the same time as most of his friends because he announced it on Instagram before calling the family. My mother texted me a screenshot with 17 exclamations. I congratulated him. I meant it. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my family, they weren't his fiancée's fault. I was not asked to be in the wedding party. My brother called me about it, which I'll give him credit for. He said it was a small wedding party, and his fiancée had 4 sisters, and it just made sense to keep it tight. I said, of course, totally understand. He said he hoped I wasn't upset. I said I wasn't. We hung up. I stood in my kitchen for about 10 minutes doing nothing, and then I made dinner. My mother called me the following week to tell me she was so glad I was being mature about it. I didn't ask what the alternative was supposed to be. When the rehearsal dinner invitation came, it listed me as a guest, not family, not a special designation of any kind, just a name on a generic guest card. The seating chart that came with it put me at table 9. My parents were at table 1 with the wedding party. My brother's childhood best friends, people I'd grown up watching play video games in our living room, were at table 3. I was at table 9 with a group of my brother's fraternity brothers from college. I almost didn't go. I had the airline app open on my phone twice. Both times I closed it without changing my flight. I told myself, this is your only brother. You don't get to opt out just because it's uncomfortable. Show up, keep it together. Go home Sunday morning and eat leftover Thai food alone in your apartment and feel whatever you feel in private. Like you always do. So I went. I wore a dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion. I drove 3 hours from my parents' house to the venue because I'd taken a rental car. Again, because my parents had driven down with my brother in their car, and there was only room for the wedding party. I arrived early. I helped myself to a drink. I smiled at strangers and made small talk with my brother's college friends at table 9 who were perfectly nice and had no idea who I was. And then my father took the microphone. He talked about my brother for about 5 minutes. It was genuinely sweet, some of it. He talked about the time my brother was 8 and tried to build a birdhouse and got so frustrated he threw a hammer into the yard. He talked about how proud he was of the man my brother had become. His voice got a little thick toward the end, and I thought, okay, this is okay. I can watch this and be okay. And then he said it. We always joked that our daughter was the one we had to drag across the finish line. Honestly, we're still waiting. And the room laughed. 200 people who didn't know me laughed at a joke about how little my father expected from his own daughter. My brother, at table 1, laughed. His fiancée looked at her plate. My mother smiled and shook her head like she was performing the role of an exasperated parent in a sitcom. He kept talking after that. He transitioned into something about the fiancée and how happy he was to welcome her to the family. The moment passed. For everyone in that room, it was a throwaway line, 2 seconds of gentle ribbing, not worth remembering. For me, it was every single moment of my life, condensed into one sentence in front of 200 strangers. I walked out. I sat in my rental car in the parking structure for about 40 minutes. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at the concrete pillar in front of me and thought about the fact that I had flown here and paid for a hotel and bought a dress and driven 3 hours. And my father had used his moment at the microphone to make a joke about how I'd never measured up. My phone didn't ring. I checked it twice. Nothing from my brother, nothing from my mother, nothing from anyone. I drove back to the hotel. I changed out of my dress. I ordered room service and ate it sitting on the edge of the bed, watching a cooking competition show I'd already seen, and I made a decision. I was going to the wedding the next day. I was going to sit in my assigned seat, wherever that was. I was going to smile at the right moments and clap when they were introduced as a married couple, and then I was going to leave, drive to the airport, and get on a plane back to Portland, and then I was going to be done. Not in an angry way, not in a screaming match, door slamming, send a long email way. I was just going to be done in the quiet way that means you stop making yourself available for things that hurt you. I wasn't going to announce it, I wasn't going to explain it. I was just going to stop flying home for holidays. Stop answering calls on the first ring. Stop performing the role of someone who is fine when I wasn't fine. The wedding was beautiful. My brother cried at the altar. I will say that first that. Whatever our history, he was genuinely in love with this woman, and it showed in the way he looked at her when she walked down the aisle. I sat in my seat. Not table 9, different seating for the reception. I was at table 11 this time, by the exit, and I watched my brother get married, and I felt something small and complicated in my chest that wasn't quite grief, but was related to it. My father hugged me during the cocktail hour. He smelled like cologne and champagne, and he said, "Good to see you, kiddo," and clapped me on the arm and walked away to talk to someone else. My mother said, "Doesn't your brother look handsome?" And I said yes, and she said, "I hope you're having fun. I know it's not the most exciting role," and I said something polite and she drifted away. I left before the cake was cut. I said goodbye to my brother and his new wife. I hugged them both. I wished them well, and I meant it. And then I went to the airport and sat in the terminal for 3 hours waiting for my flight. And I cried in the bathroom once, very briefly, and then I stopped and got a coffee and boarded my plane. That was 4 years ago. The first year was the hardest, not because I missed them exactly, but because I felt guilty for not missing them more. I kept waiting to feel like I'd made a mistake. I kept rehearsing conversations in my head where I called and explained everything, and we had some kind of breakthrough and things were finally different. The conversations stayed in my head. I didn't make the calls. My mother called me on my birthday that first year. I let it go to voicemail. She said, "Just calling to wish you a happy birthday. Hope you're doing well. Call me back when you get a chance." I didn't call back. She texted 2 days later. "Did you get my voicemail?" I texted back, "Yes. Thanks for thinking of me," and left it at that. My father didn't call at all that first birthday. He never had. Actually, birthdays were my mother's department. I noted this and filed it away and didn't examine it too closely. I built my life in Portland with real intention for the first time. I adopted a cat. I joined a recreational soccer league even though I'm bad at soccer. I got promoted at work. I started therapy again, a different therapist, one who didn't need examples and who used the word enmeshment in our third session in a way that finally made something click. My brother texted me about 6 months after the wedding to ask if everything was okay because our parents had mentioned I'd been distant. I told him I was good, just busy, life was full. He said okay and sent me a meme. We texted occasionally after that, holidays, big news, things that called for brief acknowledgement. It was polite. Functional, not close but not hostile. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was doing. There was no declaration. I just stopped. And the silence, which I had expected to be painful, turned out to be mostly peaceful. 4 years and 3 months after my brother's wedding, my phone rang at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning. I was making coffee. I looked at the screen, and it was my mother, which was not unusual, except that she never called before 10 a.m., and she almost never called on a weekday. I answered, "I need you to come home," she said. "Your brother is in the hospital." My first thought, I'm ashamed to say, was that this was the thing I'd always known would happen eventually. The thing that would require me to re-enter the orbit I'd worked so hard to step out of. Not because I wanted my brother to be in the hospital. I didn't, obviously, but because I'd always sensed that this family would call me back only when they needed something. "What happened?" I said. He'd had a cardiac event. He was stable now. They were running tests. It had happened at work. His colleague had called 911. He was at the regional hospital 40 minutes from my parents' house. He was stable. She kept saying that he was stable. "I'll drive in Saturday," I said. "We need you here sooner," she said. "He's asking for you." This is the part I couldn't explain to most people. I want to be clear, my brother was in the hospital. He was stable, but it was serious. And he had asked for me. Those are facts and they matter. I was not callous about them, but I sat with my coffee for a long moment and I thought about table 9 and table 11. I thought about being handed a generic guest card with my name on it. I thought about my father at the microphone saying, "We always had to drag her across the finish line," and the room laughing. I thought about my mother on the phone the next morning, which she had called not to check on me, but to say she hoped I wasn't going to make the rest of the trip uncomfortable. She had called me the morning after that dinner, and the conversation had been about whether I would make things difficult. Not about how I was doing, not about whether I was okay. "Can I call you back in an hour?" I said. "He asked for you specifically," she said. He said you're the one he wants there." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Give me an hour," I said. "I'll call you back." I hung up. I sat down at my kitchen table. I talked to my cat, who is not a useful sounding board but is very present about it. And I thought very hard about what I actually wanted it to do, not what I felt obligated to do, not what would make my mother comfortable, not what would allow me to avoid guilt, what I actually wanted. What I wanted was to see my brother, not because he'd earned it, not because my family deserved my presence, but because he was my brother. Because for all the ways we'd been shaped differently by the same household, he was a person I'd grown up with, and I didn't want him to be in a hospital bed asking for someone who didn't come. There was a difference, I realized, between protecting myself from my parents and punishing my brother for being the favorite. I hadn't fully separated those two things. I booked a flight for Thursday morning. The hospital room was smaller than I expected. My brother looked older, and somehow younger, at the same time, tired in a way I'd never seen on him, something stripped back from his face. His wife was there. She stood up when I walked in and hugged me, and I could feel that she meant it. My brother said, "You came." I said, "Of course I came." He cried a little. I held his hand. We didn't talk about anything important for a while. We talked about the hospital food and his colleague who'd been the one to call 911 and how the doctor kept explaining everything with a lot of technical language that neither of us fully understood. My parents arrived about an hour after I did. My mother came in first and stopped when she saw me, and something moved across her face that I hadn't expected. Relief, and also something that looked almost like guilt, though I might have been reading into it. "You came," she said. "I told you I would," I said. She hugged me. I let her. My father nodded at me from across the room, and I nodded back, and that was for a moment all that passed between us. We were in the hospital for 2 days. My brother needed a procedure, nothing too complex, and then observation. His wife and I took turns sitting with him while my parents went back to their hotel to sleep. On the second night, we were alone for a few hours, my brother half asleep, his wife down the hall making calls, and he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." I said, "For what specifically?" because I genuinely wanted to know what he thought he owed me an apology for. "Dad's speech," he said. "At the rehearsal dinner." I laughed. I shouldn't have laughed. I looked at him. "I was so nervous about everything," he said, "and it was just. I did the thing I always do where I follow their lead, and I don't question it, and I've thought about it 100 times since then. You walked out, and I didn't go after you. I don't know if you know that I noticed." I noticed. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. "It was a coward's move." I sat with that for a minute. Outside the window it was dark, and the parking lot lights were orange, and someone was pushing a cart down the hallway, and the whole thing felt very real and also very quiet. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I mean it. It matters." "Are you okay?" he said. "Like, in general. Are you okay?" I thought about my apartment in Portland, my cat, my soccer league where I'm genuinely bad but go every week anyway, my therapist who uses words like enmeshment, my friends who know my actual history and love me anyway, my job that I'm good at and that means something. "Yeah," I said. "I actually am." I stayed one more day after my brother was discharged. His wife was there and her sister flew in, and the house was full, in that way that happens during a crisis where everyone gathers and moves around each other carefully. My mother and I had one moment alone in the kitchen on the last morning. She was making coffee. I was reading something on my phone, and she said without looking at me, "I know things haven't been easy. With us. I know you've pulled back." I put down my phone. I don't know if I handled everything right, she said. When you were growing up. I waited. I probably didn't, she said. She still wasn't looking at me. She was watching the coffee maker like it required supervision. I don't know what you want me to say, she said. You don't have to say anything, I said. I don't need a speech. I'm not asking for one. What do you need? She said. And I think she actually meant it. There was something uncertain and searching in the way she asked it that I hadn't heard from her before. I thought about it. For you to mean it the next time you do something kind, I said. Not just in crisis. Not just when I show up for something. Just to mean it. That's all I actually want. She looked at me then. Okay, she said, very quietly. I nodded. I poured my coffee. We didn't hug or cry or have a breakthrough. The conversation ended, and her sister called, and she went to answer, and I stood in the kitchen alone for a moment and thought, I don't know if anything will actually change. I genuinely don't know. She might go back to the way things have always been the second I get on my plane. She might not. Both things are possible, but I had said the real thing out loud instead of swallowing it, and she had asked. And for today, that was enough. I flew home on a Friday. My brother texted me from the car on the way home from the hospital. Thank you for coming. I mean that. I texted back. I know you do. Feel better. I got back to Portland at 9 at night. My cat was annoyed with me, in the specific way cats have when they're relieved to see you, but refused to show it immediately. I unpacked. I made tea. I sat on my couch in the quiet of my own apartment, and I felt the particular kind of tired that comes not from exhaustion, but from having been very honest for several days in a row. I'm not going to tell you everything is fixed, because it isn't. I'm not going to tell you I've forgiven everything, because I'm still working on it. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a door you walk through once. It's more like a room you have to keep choosing to go back into, and some days you don't, and that's allowed too. What I can tell you is this: I went back for the right reason. I went for my brother, not for my parents' comfort. Not to ease my own guilt, not because I owed anyone anything. I went because I wanted to. And then I came home. I'm still the one who lives in Portland. I still have my cat and my soccer league and my therapist and my life that belongs entirely to me. None of that changed. The difference is that I chose it this time, not out of self-protection, but out of something clearer. Out of knowing what I actually wanted and what I didn't, and being able to tell the difference. That might not sound like much, but if you've spent most of your life in the background of your own story, learning to know the difference is everything.